All right, welcome back to Calling All Men. This is Michael Sky, and once again, we're facing the crises that our boys and men are facing in the world. And today, we're going to put a special focus on dads. Um, I'm about to be a father for the first time, and yeah, I really don't know what it's like, but I know a lot of dads out there are struggling, and I know my own father was isolated from us kids um, during the divorce and for quite long afterwards. So yeah, this is something that hits home for me, and we're going to talk to a gentleman who, yeah, is calling fathers into being powerful leaders and gathering them for training and gathering men for rites of passage in the wilderness and so on. He's a writer, a wilderness guide, a men's work leader, a somatic meditation teacher. He's helped to instigate and lead a part of the current global men's movement, which is rising. He is most comfortable in nature and he's committed to practicing and sharing work that brings our wildness and our love out into the open. He's been a three-time guest on the Joe Rogan Experience. He's spent substantial time as a wilderness therapy guide and inner city high school teacher, and he's directed and produced over 50 episodes of the hit hunting show MeatEater. As the visionary and founder of EVRYMAN, he has led retreats, hosted a paradigm shifting podcast, and had the fortune to give talks around the world on masculinity, fatherhood, and spirituality. He has two young sons and a baby daughter. He's in love with his wife, and they are living very close to the land, near the sea, where it's quiet and beautiful, except right now they're awaiting a hurricane. Dan Doty, welcome.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I got to that end part of your bio, and I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it is.
So,
It's coming. Storm's coming.
you guys get many hurricanes up that way?
No, it's quite rare. But I think it's maybe an apt way to start talking about men too. But maybe not that the storm's coming, but that it's been here for a while. But I do think there's some waves on the horizon that we really need to pay attention to.
The storms that men are facing, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything seems to be, in a way, getting worse. While at the same time, there's the rising men's movement, which I spoke of in reading your bio, and it sounds like, well, yeah, you are doing a lot in that regard. So, in this time, I'd love to hear about the rite of passage. I'd love to hear about the fatherhood program. I'd love to hear about Everyman, all of it. So, but maybe starting off, you can tell us, what are you seeing from the front lines of working with men, the men who show up, the men who you go hunting with? What are you seeing that they're struggling with?
Yeah, I would start just by naming, this moment in history as a very, very fresh, new, sort of critical, wild time. And so, if I'm going to try to be as descriptive as possible, I think what men are faced with and what I see is not just a story about men, but I'm sort of seeing the lens of men's experience through this moment. But this moment is very much about, this hurricane that's coming onto my home tonight is seemingly one of an increasing amount of climate ecological disaster. Right, you look around the globe right now, what's happening? There's multiple, and this mounting tension and fear and anxiety, just existentially, right? And so, what I'm seeing on the front lines, or where I'm paying most of my attention today, is I am proud and happy about the movement of men to come together and grow up and be present and take care of what needs to be taken care of. And I also am feeling on the front lines that the paradigm of what that means has to change now, and it has to be what I'm most alive with right now is I think for a bunch of my time in this space working with men, it's been like, let's go visit this little island of men's work, right? Let's go do these retreats. Let's go to our groups and let's have this thing that's separate from my life, in which I'm going to learn about myself. I'm going to grow. And I think it's fantastic, right? And we need to heal and we need to grow and we need each other and all of that. But I am feeling a real sense of urgency right now that we need to bring that and merge it with life, our practical lives. And through the lens of fathers, this is one of the reasons I'm so stoked about doing this type of work in the context of fatherhood, is that it's not on an island. You don't the energy that gets liberated from doing your work, from learning and growing, it has somewhere to go. It has fertile soil. It has like immediate functional results. And so what I'm most lit up about, and that's just one example, right? I think there's many other examples of how men's work, the evolution that sort of needs to occur, needs to, in my opinion, have a direct application almost in real time. And I don't know that I think the leadership and the participation and the sort of resources inside of man's body and heart and mind are needed and to be applied directly. And I'm not suggesting a reactive sort of run around kind of thing. I'm just saying, like, I think things are critical now, and I believe that the healing and the action sort of needs to be in tandem at this point.
Maybe it's like, if there was a dragon outside of the village, are we going to round up some guys and send them to a university for 4 years to learn to become dragon slayers?
Exactly.
Right? Or are we going to kind of learn as we go? Or
And that's a great lens, the learn as we go thing. So let me slow down. Let me talk about fatherhood a little bit, because that really is where I spend a great majority of my time and my energy. And so, what seems to be happening in the world of let's just be really clear, my myopic small world of dads that I am a part of. What is happening there is a historical shift in a father's assumed role in a partnership and in a family, where a generation ago, my father's generation, I'm taking liberties here, but basically being a great provider and, kind of getting the family ahead of where they came from. It being like, I think, being a generally good guy, I'm sure is part of it too. There's a snapshot of what that generation's sort of mandate was as fathers, but now my generation, it's deepened and changed dramatically, where because of the way the world is shifting, right, our, I guess, expectations, I'm not sure who holds those expectations, but there is this spoken and unspoken job description now that requires the ability to nurture and be connected and to be emotionally healthy and to be relational and to continue, and maybe even more so, hold it together in the world, have a direction, make the money, do the things, participate in the household, all of the things. It's like, it was like almost somebody hit a button and said, "Hey dad, guess what? We're going to ramp this from 15 to 1500 like overnight. There you go. Figure it out." And guys are so into it. It's this incredible opportunity too. The humanizing element of becoming a father. It's like, we could talk about that for days. What this does to a man's heart and his understanding of the world, his consciousness, his sense of place in the world, it fundamentally changes. And that sort of combination of intense responsibility that we can't really meet, and this explosion of humanity within us, creates this beautiful crucible for growth. And I think it's one of the only remaining rites of passage that is somewhat intact, and most men are doing that completely on their own. And so what I'm attempting to do is creating space and structure and context for men to go through this together. And as you can imagine, it's brilliant. It's just absolutely inspiring and beautiful.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. I mean, if you just look at the divorce statistics, and you can see that a lot is changing, and things are not working. If you get married till death do us part, or like my parents for all of eternity, in their religion. My parents divorced when I was 14, so eternity didn't last that long. But yeah, now my mother's complaint against my father was more that he wasn't playing, I guess, more of the traditional masculine role. Like he was making good money. He was, there was a lot of things he was doing, but I think she felt like he didn't stand up enough. He didn't confront certain people enough. He didn't, do that sort of thing enough. And yeah, that was enough for maybe that was enough for divorce. But now what you're saying is that we're expected to even do more than the provide, protect, and everything else, right? In fact, we're not needed so much to protect anymore or provide as much as we once were.
I think that that's one way to say it. I actually think the lens which I do believe we need to protect, actually maybe more than in a long time. But I think the what's needed to be protected from has become so complex. It is not just the bullies on the playground or the saber-toothed tigers trying to you know eat people, eat us, right? It's not that. I actually feel as a dad myself, the level of proactive protection is immense. It's really immense, and it's really extremely hard and complex right now because everything's changing so fast. I don't know how to best orient my family around the rise of artificial intelligence. I have no fucking clue. I don't know how to protect my children. I mean, we're making a lot of decisions about where we live and how we live in terms of the changing world around us. Um, I certainly know that my children, one of my main protective elements has been from myself, has been from the demons inside of me, the unhealed, the ways that my habitual darkness, my wife's, right, are. I mean, honestly, if there's one direct thing, past like the certain normal threshold of we have a house and we have food and our locks work or whatever, right? Like, so we have we live in a place where we don't have to lock the car all the time, right? There's a quite a level of safety where we live, but I mean, we all walk around now with an overwhelming level of, no, I shouldn't say everybody, right? We can't say all. There is a generalized sense of anxiety and stress and tension that seems to be embodied everywhere. And I would call out that that's not false. We're not making that up. There are threats. They're bigger than we know how to handle, and they're hard to even name. So I would say that the job of a dad as a protector right now is ramping in a sense.
Mm. Yeah, I can. As you talk about that, yeah, I can see that, and we can include social media, the algorithms, porn on all the smartphones. Food is growing more and more addictive. Um, you know, so yeah, there are a lot of ways that we're facing threats that we've never faced before, right? Dan, would you take us into your background? Like how did you grow up, and maybe the some of the challenges that you faced as a young man and also a father?
Yeah. I grew up in a little town in North Dakota, on the prairie. It was really cold. It was very, um, you know, in the hinterlands, basically, off of mainstream culture. I would say very protected, nuclear family, very loving mom and dad, but a deeply buried sense of truth. I would say, like, the whole culture I grew up in is like, literally any point you ask anybody how they're doing, that's fine. And I was a sensitive young chap, and I could tell for sure nobody was fine. Like the spidey senses in me were clear that truth was not coming out very often, if at all. And that was one big element of my childhood. That gap between embodied truth and spoken truth was just a really big deal. And I could see elements of my life, my work with EVRYMAN, my sort of work with embodiment and sort of learning and expressing and teaching emotionality for men certainly has roots there, right? Because it just didn't feel, it was hurtful and it didn't feel healthy, But at the same time, I had a really incredibly loving family. We all had our, each one of us has had, has our things and our issues. And I, I kind of was a very tender, shy little bookworm nerd guy until I started martial arts as a pretty young age, and then just like flourished in that, just like took it on and found a lot of ways to be successful, I guess, in life, and just had this sort of somewhat ideal naive Midwestern upbringing, played in metal bands and played football and again, just sort of like a small world. And then when I was in college, I started, my girlfriend at the time pulled me by the ear to Europe for a year to study abroad. And then just like my mind just detonated a bomb in my soul and my mind. And, it started a very, very adventurous life out of the gate as a young man. And then spent a lot of time as a wilderness therapy guide in my early 20s, where I learned to facilitate by immense repetition in really intense settings. Became I think, as you said in the bio, I taught high school in the Bronx for a couple of years and got some further education around teaching and things. And
Did you become a wilderness guide and work as a teacher in the Bronx, maybe to, I don't know, provide some kind of what you didn't get as a young man? I mean, were you trying to
yeah,
support other struggling youth?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think that there's certainly an element of that, absolutely. I would imagine there's easy to make a case that there's a, most of the work I've done has some element of, stemming from unmet needs and things. I think that's one lens. I don't think that's the full accurate lens, but I think that's part of it. Yeah, as a child, I had a lot of love. I had a lot of, my father was very proud of me. My mother was very supportive. The darker
Your
side
parents
of
stay
that,
together?
they did, and they're still together. But I also grew up entitled in a lot of ways too, right? Like my mom, she did all the cooking and cleaning, and there's just a lot of things I'm still working through to just sort of like wean off of bad habits that got ironed in the first place. And I do think that let's just take the wilderness guiding thing for sure. There's some elements about it that just first of all, it just worked for me. Like I stumbled into the perfect calling at like 21 and a half or 22 years old. It's just like, what a lucky, and it felt lucky. I was living in Panama, writing and just, kind of fucking off, and needed some cash, and went to Craigslist to find a job in the States and saw an ad for a wilderness therapy guide. Had no idea that it existed. And was like, huh, I mean, I had spent a lot of time in nature. Wilderness was my thing. And
Where was that?
So the first program was in Utah.
Huh.
The kind of lower brown hills west of the main interstate that goes north to south there. So yeah, therapeutic. That was a private pay therapeutic program, and yeah, just ate it up. It was a primitive skills program, so we busted all our fire with hand drills and bow drills. And when we got there, we got handed a half of a hide of an elk and built our own backpacks out of leather and sticks. And
Wow, that sounds awesome.
I mean, it was awesome. I mean, it was so awesome. And, you know, I got to like basically step in to be a professional big brother, as you know, that's kind of how I thought of it as a starting point. And then, yeah, had wonderful, you know, wonderful guidance and teaching and how to facilitate and how to show up for people. And but something very natural in me got to come alive too, which was just like I've always really, really deeply loved people and can easily relax and find the good in others. And I don't know, there's just something about the holding of space and the caring for others that was very natural for me. And
Did you grow up religious, and did you have a lot of brothers and sisters?
I got a little brother, 3.5 years younger, and we grew up in Lutheran churches, in a Lutheran church. And I was pretty on fire with it at a young age. Like I was into church. I felt it. I felt it a lot. I had a lot of, I guess I don't really know how to say this. Oftentimes I'll say I was, you know, I was a little bit of an odd bird as a kid, but I was obsessed with eternity. I was obsessed with like death. And I don't think it's that weird. I mean, my kids think about that stuff all the time too, but I think I always thought about it, or that's how I remember it. And yeah, I definitely had a lot of experiences as a kid that I would put in the category of you know, spirituality or mysticism or something, you know.
So, okay, so you were a wilderness guide, and then you were a teacher in the Bronx, and then what?
Um, I mean, I did a little bit more wilderness sort of work and for a little bit of time, and then well, here's the important inflection point. So while I was in the Bronx, going to school at night, teaching during the day, I had a complete and utter breakdown, like a complete life breakdown, burnt out, quarter life crisis, you could call it Saturn return, call it whatever you want, but like everything blew up. And in that blow up, I found my first men's group, which was truly life changing. Right, I was 27 and a half or maybe 28. And that moment had the resonance that felt similar to stumbling into the wilderness work. It was just, I had literally never heard of a men's group in my life till I met this dude at a dinner party, and he invited me, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll come. You know, I just didn't know anything about it. And I think about that first night. I really do. I think about it quite often. Like it comes up in my mind quite often, but it was really such a huge, huge, huge shifting experience in my life. That first time I sat with a group of men. And in that same period, I began a meditation practice.
Can you just tell us about that? I think
Yeah.
many men attending this event might never have participated in anything like that.
Yeah. So there's a group called the Brotherhood in New York City, and you know, met weekly. I don't remember. I think probably 3 hours. I think I don't remember what night. Maybe Wednesday nights. And it was thematically based on some of David Data's work. David Data is a spiritual teacher and men's work sort of leader, right? And you know, the first night, I literally had no idea, but it was a bit of a trial, right? So I was like invited to come in for a night to check it out if I'd be a good fit, and it was a little formalized, right? So like that type of men's work, like you sit with your back straight and, you know, you're practicing sort of presence and awareness during the meetings. But it was, you know, a group of probably 8 or 9 or 10 men. I was the youngest by at least 6 or 7 or 8 years, I think. And, you know, I stepped into this room of total bad, you know, like bad in the world, but men who were deeply in spiritual practice and, you know, consciousness exploration. And I mean, I walked out of there with a completely new set of possibility for who I could be, how I could be, where I could go, how life could go. It was a huge, just sitting with them and hearing them and being regarded by them as a peer was enough to change my life, I think. And yeah, and I was in an intense part of my life. And, some of those guys are still some of my nearest, dearest friends at this point. And happy to share more if you have any other specific questions about it.
Yeah, no, just take us into fatherhood and maybe challenges with that, and then how you started these different programs for men.
Yeah. Yes, that was my foray into men's work. I then moved out west and joined a different men's group and found one of my main mentors and teachers. His name was Owen Marcus, and so together, he and I and some other folks started EVRYMAN, and this was about 7 years ago. Well, I'll never forget. I'll never not know, because it was the same year my first son was born. And EVRYMAN was and still exists. I'm no longer a part of it, but EVRYMAN is an organization that brings men together to teach and practice and train, very, very straightforward embodiment and emotional skill sets and ways of being. And so, we did a lot of retreats. I led a bunch of wilderness expeditions, and it was a really, really wild and beautiful time. I was in my early 30s, and the media got a hold of us and, splashed us all around the world. And I think some of that media exposure really was put some gas in the tank for the men's movement in general. And it really kind of kickstarted a lot of, not that it kickstarted, but it was part of a thrust that was happening and still is happening, right? I think the landscape today compared to 7 years ago in terms of what's happening out there for men is very, very different, right? There's been a real ramping happening. So I left, and I would say, so, parts of the EVRYMAN thing were also deeply dysfunctional and internally, right? So externally, like, we did amazing work in the world, and we never, at least when I was there, never fully pulled our together, all the way. And so I left 3 years ago. At that point, I had my second son, right? And then since that point, I have been developing Fatherhood Unlocked, which is the main men's brand and sort of community that I've created. I have been doing a fair amount of wilderness work. I've ramped it down this year to focus on the fatherhood stuff. But then I do still have a program called Rite of Passage, which is a first time hunting camp. So teaching, hunting through the lens of, depth oriented men's work. And we come together.
I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it culminates in a 4-day whitetail deer hunt in Texas. But we meet for 5 months, once a month before it happens. And we do a combination of, talking about ethics and learning the basics of hunting tactics. And part of it's also for safety and practice, right? Guys have a lot of time to practice with a weapon, with a rifle or a bow or whatever they use. And,
is this meeting up in person?
It's online until the hunt is in person. Obviously, okay. We're not quite to digital hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we meet digitally for 5 months, and then we get together for a hunt. And it's it's the type of experience that I'm really stoked about, because not taking away anything from talking or process oriented men's work. It's all good. But I mean, this, having faced with pulling a trigger and taking a life and putting your, being elbows deep in hot guts and blood. And it's, you can't replicate that. Right. But to do that with a lot of reverence, not manufactured reverence, but to do that in a space where you can be honest about how it feels, about what's going on, you can actually be there to feel it all, is, quite a profound thing.
Yeah. My parents were getting divorced. For the summer, I went out west, and I lived back east in Maryland. And my ancestors, they're all from Utah, Idaho area, come from a large Mormon family. And to me, they're all, and they were cowboys, and it was the Wild West for me. And my grandfather and uncles were, they wanted to take the city slicker and try to give him some, man training. And one morning, my grandfather woke me up and took me out to the barn and said my job was separate the baby sheep from the mama sheep. And of course, they're all crying, right? And then I got to hold the babies down while he cuts off their testicles with his teeth, and then cuts off the tail and burns it. After that, he took me to a sheep that was hanging upside down, and it had been killed. And he said, he handed me his buck knife. He said, I want you to skin it and gut it. And he walked away. But I mean, he was trying to give me some kind of rite of passage, I guess.
Did it
But
work? Did it work?
I always loved the way my grandfather taught the best. It was just through challenging me, like believed I could do it, leave me on my own to do it. And yeah. So what is it? I mean, I can only imagine some of the young men today coming out to hunt for the first time. Yeah. What is that? What do they usually go through?
Well, I mean, these are adult men, grown men, right? Last year we had a father son, so there was one adolescent, which was pretty rad. But for the most part, these are very established, successful dudes with families who have had this question in them. This sort of, I mean, this is outside, just in normal life, right? As and I think you read it in the bio, but I spent a big chunk of time in the hunting world professionally, right? I was on the original crew and became the director of MeatEater, which is a big hunting thing now, one of the biggest. And so I was part of gutting hundreds of animals, and it was just very much my life. And as I went through all that, everywhere in my life I would go, I would find friends and colleagues and just people I'd run into all the time, men who had this feeling in them. They're like, I've never done that. And there's something about that. There's just something, some of them had the context of like, God, I wish my dad would have brought me there. Or others, it was just a pure curiosity. And others just had this sense of like, I need to experience this. I need to know what this is like. And a lot of times it comes through the lens of food too, right? And death. Yeah, I mean, and that's really what it's about in a lot of ways, right? I mean, hunting it's about death. It's exactly what it is. And so, yeah, I think men who eat burgers 5 nights a week and pay attention to themselves on a deep level and have never put 2 and 2 together and sort of experience the responsibility that it takes to end a life. It's like, okay, let's do this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about the fatherhood program. On your website, it says, imagine a world with an entire generation of fully engaged, powerful fathers. First of all, like what is that? What is your more detailed vision of that?
Yeah. Well, let's harken back to the past a little bit, which I'm trying to remember who did I hear talking about this recently? Oh, there's a wonderful podcast called The Emerald. And there's an episode about AI and this idea of uninitiated men wielding power being a very dangerous thing. And it actually had this really wonderful basic thesis that, the runaway tech stuff that's going on is fundamentally about a father wound and uninitiated masculinity, right, running itself rampant. And in that, he shared just this sense that, a lot of men had fathers who were either overly harsh or overly absent in some way. And just this, and everybody kind of feels this in their own way. And it's not true, right? There's good dads out there. There's lots of people with present dads, but there's way more people without. And there is this just gap. There's this absence of, a loving present dad, and that can look like a million things, right? In no way do I think that that's a narrow focus. Like there's so many ways that looks, but there is this absence, right? And there's incredible statistics too, right? They call it the dad effect or the present dad effect, right? If a father is even just present, right, doesn't even have to be whatever. But even just having a dad there impacts mental health, social economic success, everything into the future
Yeah.
wildly.
Yeah. Yeah. Likelihood of ending up in prison or not.
Yeah.
So many things. Yeah.
But then you add the element of a dad who takes his post seriously as a steward, who, and there's no aim of perfection here, right? But a dad who is responsive and present. I've been doing it's been really wild to do this work with dads because I've been doing lots of reading and research for myself. But like when it comes down to it, psychologists break out what kids need into pretty simple elements. Like one way to look at it is you got emotional and social and intellectual and sexual and spiritual growth. And for each of these things, kids need guidance, they need boundaries, and they need, oh shit, what's the third? They need guidance, boundaries, and I think affirmation or nurturing or something like that. And that's obviously the job is bigger than that, but even if a dad was to slow down enough to pay attention, am I able to set boundaries in these areas? Am I able to have conversations and guide in these areas? Am I able to blah, blah, it's just, fatherhood is an overwhelmingly ripe place to do good in the world, to make an impact. And it's also exactly what dudes need. It's exactly what dudes are missing. It's what guys are wanting, whether they know it or not. And I don't mean being a dad's what they want, but the elements that come with fatherhood, the heart openness, the connection to other people, the physicality. My God, do you know how healing it is for so many men simply to just have and cuddle? Like, big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, right? And so,
Yeah. It's what you were talking about. I liked what you said. When a dad takes his post or takes his post as a dad, it's like you're painting fatherhood as like a calling for men. That it's a great responsibility and an opportunity to really grow as a man.
immensely, immensely. If a man wants to look at it this way, it is the most overwhelmingly substantial opportunity for transformation. It just is. Like there's just no way around it. It requires that of you. It literally requires that of you.
People's lives and futures literally hang in the balance.
The people that you love more than anything on the planet, the people that you love more than yourself, the people you would do anything. And that's like this amazing trap it brings you into, which is like it fundamentally shows your narcissism to you in the mirror. It elevates others above your own self fundamentally, and then you have to wrestle with that and you have to work with that. And it just holds you to the fire. It literally just holds you fire. The thing that I say a lot is that, I mean, how many years do we go to school to be like an accountant? I mean, if you in the States, if you do like undergraduate and a master's, so at least 6, right? Or maybe 4 of that, whatever. Great. Good job. Have a lot of responsibility, move people's money around, right? you become a dad, you're fundamentally like how you show up and talk and breathe impacts the life of not only your kids but their kids, and just like it's overwhelming impact. And how much training do we do for that? None. None, really. Like we don't even talk about it. We don't even talk about it. So we're just doing what we can to start creating some spaces for guys who want to flip it. And I don't mean to like dramatize it. And I probably am. I'm probably just even by talking about it, by highlighting it, I'm like, like, it's this thing. And there's some reality to that. You ask most dads what's the most important thing in their life, and they don't even think about it. Their kids. It's just it.
Yeah, I don't think that you're over dramatizing it. I grew up very religious, and there, I mean, the path of the father is very much honored, and I only heard patriarchy in a positive, beautiful sense growing up. I mean, it's a role of service and stewardship and love and guidance, and it was never a dirty dirty word to me. So, but I imagine a lot of young men don't ever feel called to it these days. There is so much, I think I don't have the statistic, but I know a lot of young men are putting off or just not having kids, getting married, starting a family, even leaving home with their parents and starting and joining the workforce. Like they're kind of saying whatever the calling is to adulthood and responsibility and sacrifice, they're like, nah, And I imagine some of it's because there has been a real demonization of men in a lot of ways over the years, and fathers. You see on like a lot of the TV shows, the dad is the bumbling idiot.
Yeah.
And
I don't think it's the demonization though. I don't think that's what drives it. I think what drives it is that most adult men are haven't developed beyond a adolescent stage themselves. And so I don't think that there's a well established image or sense of what a mature man even looks like most places. And I just feel like, how do you get somewhere you can't see, right? It's hard, how do you, there's very few, there's very few aspirational models for health in terms of the maturation of men in general. And that's, yeah.
and at the same time, there's maybe the models they are seeing are not attractive. They're like, if that's what it is to be a man or a father, why do I want to sacrifice everything for that?
Totally. I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of factors here. I think there's existential factors going on that it's hard for us to I don't know if we can fully wrap our heads around yet. I think that
You mentioned one of the big factors on your journey was stepping into that men's circle, and seeing those embodied men who I imagine were quite aspirational. Like, oh, I could be that.
yeah, exactly. And to make a distinction there though, to because a lot of young men can look on Instagram or whatever and see plenty of successful men, or like what's the massive influencer guy from the UK that went to jail this last year? You know what I'm talking about? Like he became the biggest influencer in the world, and he has a platform of
Andrew Tate.
yeah, Andrew Tate, right? So yeah, so Andrew Tate shows one extreme end of aspiration, right? Cars and all of these things, and but I guess guys can look online or look around and see images of aspirational qualities, be positive or negative, whatever. But to be actually in community, actually in the presence of, and in to be regarded by, right? And so we're actually getting into territory here of the basic initiation, right? The fundamental sort of missing initiatory process that history seems to show has been in place in cultures all around the world for a long time. And I think a lot of these conversations that we're having, you can easily map them back to a basic lack of community, a lack of elderhood, a lack of initiation that it's just not there anymore, you know. And I think a lot of us are doing what we can to begin restructuring something, right? And there's lots of ways to start, but it's an enormous project.
Yeah, we're trying to become fathers, even if we didn't have fathers. We're trying to become elders. Maybe we didn't have elders. We're kind of, in this impoverished state of. I mean, in the tradition I grew up in, there was a lot given to me and passed down to me and modeled to me that was beautiful and healthy and masculine and um, when my parents divorced at 14, I had two younger brothers who were kind of too young to receive all of that. And my dad left home when I was 14. My brothers were 6 and 10. And they didn't really have the connection to the my grandfathers, and my dad had left home. I left home a couple years after that. And kind of that what was given to me wasn't given to them. And when I look at young men struggling today, that's kind of how I interpret it. Like I see them all following an Andrew Tate, and I see the hunger for brotherhood, because it's like him and his brother against the world. I see them latching on to Jordan Peterson. It's like they see a real man there who's standing up and is speaking like a father and is, and there's this hunger that and this the sad part is they're missing. I imagine so many are missing that real father figure or that real brother, in their real everyday life.
Yeah, because if they have those actually in place physically, the connective elements that would need to be there for actual connection and transmission of something important just aren't generally available, right? It's impoverished is the right word for sure. It's fucking heartbreaking is what it is for me. I mean, it's just like, God, like the amount of existential turmoil in young men and adult men is it's hard to quantify it or qualify it, but it is extremely high.
Yeah. When I think of what it is to be an elder, I think of like, is that's like fatherhood expanded. It's like, okay, these are not my kids, but here they are in my community or showing up in my world in some way. I'm going to put my arm around them and I'm going to kind of do what a father would do, give them some guidance, care about them, um, be a strong, some boundaries, etc. What does it mean to be an elder for you?
Well, I'm definitely not one. I'd say that. Maybe I am to a 16-year-old, sure, but I think like the more formal version of elder is I got a ways to go before that's around. I have been. I wonder if you hopefully maybe are having an interview with Stephen Jenkinson or know who Stephen Jenkinson is. He's yeah.
Interviewed him a couple of days ago.
Good. Yeah. When I say the word elder, he comes the closest to the forefront of my mind. And I had a chat with him a couple months ago, and in my talk with him, it wasn't so much an interview. It was meant to be an interview, but it was more of an impromptu eldering process. And I just was like, and it was just beautiful. And I think, I think maybe what elder means is, or one of the functions of elderhood is to be able to see beyond the limited scope of what I can see, right? An elder for me is someone who can help me make sense of how little I'm actually aware of. And I think that is, but the cool thing is we can be peers and do that for each other very well, right? We can do that for younger people. Younger people can do that for me. But I think elderhood has that unique, seasoned quality of experience. And one thing Stephen has said, I've heard him say, is elderhood is not granted by age. Elderhood is earned through an immense amount of age plus, I don't know what you would say, but loss, grief, attention, love, living, real living,
And I might add like some shouldering of responsibility for the future generations and taking on that responsibility, right? Not just kind of living out your retirement. Um, yeah, it's as he presents it, there's like I feel a calling there, and you kind of poo-pooed it a little bit earlier, but I see you really making a beautiful calling to fatherhood, like dramatize it, I would say.
Yeah, no,
It's an awesome thing.
yeah, no, I'm into it, man. I think just as I was saying that, I'm like, there's also, it goes back to what I said at the beginning too about, the whole men's, when the men's retreats, you go down this island and you do it over here. There is a danger, I think, of over talking things too. It just, when we over conceptualize something, we set ideals that stick for ourselves and others, and there's danger in that, or there's at least things that need to be undone. But no, I'm up for calling it out loudly. I really do fundamentally, deeply believe that if there is a more balanced way for us to live here on this planet together, an incredibly helpful element will be healthy males. And I see a linchpin in here if we play the longer game, that raising, fathering to an organic level of honor, which it carries on its own, if we can just take seriously what the it is we're doing. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's complex. Everything's complex these days. Living is complex these days. Fathering is complex, but what are we actually talking about? We're talking about letting our basic human qualities come forward, and trusting them. It's not a mystery to love our kids. It's not a mystery to hold a boundary. It's just we've had a lot of gaps in practice,
Yeah. What do you see are the aspects that we most need training in as fathers? I'll preface this with an example. Like I went when my parents got divorced. Well, I grew up in the context very black and white. We were saved for the last days of the world to win the battle in the hearts of men, and it was this kind of beautiful calling that we had, and I looked up to my elders. I looked up to adults and my parents, and then when the divorce happened, it was nasty. It was like these guys are teenagers, like they're acting like teenagers. All the adults that got involved seemed to me to be like, I had to take another look at them. Like, wait, I was looking up to you, and I see. Like I see a lot of young guys today focused on being tough, being warriors, being alpha, which I think is a powerful aspect of a transition to make, kind of from a boy to a strong, a tough man. But it's like we're not making that next evolution to what, like, to me, an elder might have come in, I don't know, put his arm around the whole family or around both of my parents and help guide us to some beautiful place that they couldn't do between themselves. Um, that's one big opportunity, I think, if we're gonna have the respect of our kids as well in the future. I think that's something we have to learn to do as humans is get along and resolve conflict a little bit better.
Well, 100%. I mean, yeah. So what do I see as some of the main trainings? Here's a couple. Here's some generalities, but they're pretty on. You know, if you're gonna take, and this comes from sort of like the coaching world, right? But you take life and you break it into doing and being, and uh, that even just making that bifurcation sets up some very, and I like to train equally, right? So being, and you could even break it into relating as a third category. Some of my colleagues and mentors do that, but we need to train our ability to slow down and just be present with what is and stop, right? That just is. Like, we need to learn how to be present, and that's workable. We can
And
practice
that's
it.
the being
That's
part.
part of the being. Also, on the being and maybe on the relating aspect, we need to learn to soften. We need to learn to feel. We need to learn to not just empathize from our minds, but truly learn how to get in sync and into coherence with other people. That's And the cool thing is it's trainable. It's workable, right? And on the doing side, we that's the thing about this day and age too, is we don't get to relax that. At least most guys. Like, I'm on the hook for the being present and for the being nurturing and connected and warm, and I am the breadwinner of our home, and I have these businesses that I'm running, and so I have to do at an incredibly effective and efficient level, and you kind of put all that together, and you could make a story just about a really integrated and balanced leadership, right? Just that's one way to contextualize it all. But within that, you can isolate very specific things, and every dad has all kinds of his own unique things to lean into. But when you come together in community and as a group, it accelerates the process of growing, because these dudes are going through their own thing, but it's just not that different, right? I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful, humbling things that happens when you get together with men in an honest capacity. Is you're like, all right, we're way more alike. Like, we're going through the same, and we can really, really help each other deeply by
Live on the
by
same planet, have the same feelings. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, the dynamics are similar. There's a collective experience that we're all participating in.
So, what are some of the practices that you personally do, and what's part of the training that you offer fathers?
Yeah. So, personally, what I've been you maybe see from my background, but I've been a practicing meditator for, I mean, I guess since I was 27, 28 in New York, so about 15 years, 14 years, and that's a big part of my life. Um, the sort of second, so that's one lineage I carry, right? I'm a student of Reggie Ray in a Tibetan Vajrayana lineage, and so that infuses my work very much. So part of what I share through that is somatic protocols and meditation. So really slowing down, breathing with the body, relaxing into the body, becoming more aware, and beginning to be able to identify and sort of, um, I guess maybe the cleanest way to say it is ways to get out of your head, ways to sort of intentionally get out of your head, and then to begin to live from a more balanced embodied place, and a lot comes out of that lineage. The sort of emotional, relational elements, my training mostly came through Owen Marcus, who I mentioned, who he was trained by some of the foremost somatic psychologists. So Peter Levine, who created somatic experiencing, Ron Kurtz created this method called Hakomi. And so these were, and they're very prominent now, but ways of relating and working with trauma and just working with each other through the lens of the body. And so Owen took a lot of that work and much more and built a really elegant way to learn how to identify and experience emotion and communicate in an authentic way through that place. And so that's a big part of how I work. And really another way to say that is just how to, there's ways to get in touch and just honestly be more honest, be more transparent, right? I mean, honest with the body, honest with the feelings, and not just some mental conception, right? And then the third, I guess, vein of training comes from my background as a consultant and a coach, and just sort of an all-around organizational mind, right? Which is the doing part. You know, it's nothing fancy or complicated, but we can get down to, you know, what's the big things that we need to do that are going to move our lives in the direction that's going to create more health for our families. You know, there's that's fun. And you kind of link all those together, like the being present, the being in alignment with what you actually feel, and then being able to operationalize that. And you got some, you know, you got a good strong fire to cook with.
I saw also you have another program, Ring of Fire, which is yeah, you're supporting the rise of men's work and men's coaching, men's movement, and helping men succeed as entrepreneurs, which I think is a beautiful thing, because if we can make it a business, then we can devote our lives to it. But if it's not, if we can't make a business out of it, it's hard to give much to it.
I'm glad to hear you say that. And yes, that's the entire point of the Ring of Fire. I've done a couple cohorts to date, and that was the part of the puzzle that I had to really invest in myself, right? That's not the background I came from. I was a, you know, wilderness guy. But it is, I think, one of the most critical elements going on in this space, because it was part of the dysfunction at EVRYMAN, was just it wasn't monetized. It just wasn't monetized appropriately. And we had plans to, it's just never kind of shook out. But there's an interesting gap here between the amount of impact that men receive from this. And I'll tell you an anecdote about that in a second, but the amount of impact that's received versus the clarity around monetary value, right? It's a big gap. There's a difference there. And I think it's understandable for it's emerging, right? This is not mainstream.
What do you mean there's a gap?
The world is not used to paying for men to go out and heal themselves together. It's just not an established habit, right? Like,
it's a very American thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in the prevailing dominant culture, in order for this to take root, it has to be professionalized. And, one of the anecdote that I want to share was that, I didn't ever keep actual numbers. I wish I had, but like all of the years of doing men's retreats, the percentage of men that stuck with it, insanely high. But then the percentage of men who not only stuck with it, but made it their life's work. I can't picture anything in my life that had a conversion rate of like, this is it. This is what the world needs. I'm called to do this. It's just like, whoa, right? There is a virality to what occurs here, which is insane. So to bring this part of the conversation, as I'm building Fatherhood Unlocked, this ecosystem, this community, um, I've taken my licks, I've gotten my experience here, and so I'm building. Actually, next Monday, from our recording here, is going to be the first day of the first cohort of facilitator training, and I have already built the structure to pay these facilitators that I train. Nobody's going to get rich, coming into my program, but I am going to pay them a meaningful amount of money to come and help propagate this. And I think it just has to be that way. We have to take that leap and begin to have the exchange that legitimizes this.
You say on that page, you say men's coaching and transformational work is an honorable calling. Um, and yeah, I think that's another thing that we can honor in addition to, brotherhood, fatherhood, elderhood, right? You talked about being a big brother to those kids in the wilderness. Like, you hear a lot in the men's work about king, magician, lover, warrior, but I'm seeing like brother, father, elder, men's coach. These are great callings. These are great things to embody and be trained in as well, so we can really bring our values, so we can be of service.
Yeah, and that word that is really where it tends to go, service, right? And there's just my I think underneath all of this, my hope or vision for all of it is that one day the majority of this how can I say this? I just hope for men to be healthily in their right place in life, in a way that honors in a way that shows them a way to honor the rest of life, right? The strange imbalance, I don't know if it's strange, but it feels imbalanced, right? The basic set point that Western men, and let's just be honest, like most of the men in men's work are white men, right? That's who we're talking to for the most part. That's what we're talking about. And I do think that I think one thing we probably need to do more of is talk about what's really happening here, right? Because it's easy to get stuck in the men's space and just not connect it to the rest of life and what would be healthy for ourselves and others, right? So one of the things I'm working on is um, a men's organization that is community service focused, and this isn't a new concept. I mean, you talk about old fraternal organizations like the Elks and the Masons and all these things. Like men came together most oftentimes for fraternity and for service. And so this summer I tested it out, and I got men from 5 different men's groups here locally together, and we raised a bunch of money, and we went and we got some equipment donated, and we cleaned up a family's house that had burned down. We just did a full big day of service, and it was the best professional day of my life, I think. But it was just to me, it just felt like we're doing what we should do normally, right? And so that's what this is about to me. Like, how do we treat each other better? How do we treat women better? How do we treat our kids better? How do we treat ourselves better? How do we treat the earth better? How do we treat our communities better? It's just like at the end of it, I'm just looking for a healthy normality,
Mm.
if there is such
Yeah,
a thing.
how do we restore healthy family and community? And yeah, because any enduring community, or I mean, to me it was inside of a religious thing. There's all kinds of roles of service and people showing up for each other and ways people come together and take care of each other. And yeah, and I mean, so many people have moved away from religion, and myself included, but then we're kind of left without all of these bonding cohesive ways to be in service to each other and to celebrate and to unite.
Yeah, it's a big hole. It's a big hole that's left when we don't. I mean, it's funny. I took my kids to church for the first time last Sunday, and I grew up Lutheran. I haven't. I am deeply connected to elements of Christianity, but I'm not a Christian, right? I'm not a practicing Christian. My wife's not either. But we went to this little hippie church in our little village that we hadn't been to, and it was one of the. It was it. The impact was just one time, just like sitting with a bunch of our neighbors and having a time to wish well for others and speak what's going on and hear a few words about it was she basically talked about beginner's mind and humility. It's just like, well, god damn, if that's not healthy. It was just so simple and healthy. We just got to be together in a intentional context. Like, gosh, man, we could do with that. We could do with more of that.
Yeah, amen. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time and for putting out a calling to men, a beautiful calling to be fathers, to be men's coaches, to be of service and yeah, seeing that for men, that possibility of being men of honor, being greater men for our people, and for the work you're doing and the pathways you're creating. Um, is there maybe one final message, if you could speak directly to maybe the fathers out there who are feeling disconnected?
Yeah, slow down. Make sure you take time to slow down and do whatever the hell it takes to soften and find what it is that you're feeling and actually thinking and actually needing, and find your deeper, like whatever it takes, find the deeper part of yourself as often as you can.
Dan, where can they find you online?
DanDoty.com.
DanDoty.com. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Michael. Thanks for the conversation.